Hey guys, Bicebump here, bringing you this Frost Death Knight Shadowlands talent guide. Today I'll walk you through the entire Frost DK talent tree, discussing every talent, when they see play, what to synergize with, etc. At the end we're also going to take a look at a couple of builds, and this obviously includes both Breath Synagoga builds, Obliteration builds, as well as what you would pick up with a dual wield versus two-handed weapon. To start off, let's take a look at the level 15 row, where we got Inexorable Assault, Icy Talons, and Cold Heart. Inexorable Assault is a completely passive talent, which just adds some damage over time. It doesn't synergize with anything really. The hit itself crits independently of the Obliterate. It doesn't work with Killing Machine or anything at all. We've got Icy Talents. This is a bit of a annoying talent which requires you to keep track of the buff and make sure you spend runic power in order to keep up the haste buff. It does synergize with Killing Machine. The increased attack speed does mean you get more natural Killing Machine procs. However, that number is not enough in order to bring this talent up to a competitive value. This is generally never picked. It's simply too annoying to keep up, and even if you do keep it up properly, it's not powerful enough. Finally, we've got Cold Heart. This is a very strong single target nuke on a roughly 40-second cooldown. That's generally how long you wait to use it. Importantly, this talent doesn't synergize well with Obliteration, and that's due to our Pillar of Frost window just being too valuable when it comes to pressing other buttons. If you were to use Cold Heart in your Pillar of Frost window, you have to give up either using a Killing Machine proc on Obliterate or generating a Killing Machine. And that's kind of like a sacrifice which creates an anti-synergy between Obliteration and Cold Heart. Generally in this talent row, you pick up Inexorable Assault whenever you're running an Obliteration build, just because of this anti-synergy I mentioned. If you're running Breath Synagoga, you would pick up Cold Heart, and that's kind of your options in this row in any scenario. For the 25 row, this is all about resource generation. We've got Runic Attenuation. This procs runic power on your auto attacks. Important to note here is that the reduced attack speed of a two-handed weapon actually doesn't mean you get a lot less of these runic power procs. We're talking something like 2-3%, so it's insignificant. We also got the Murderous Efficiency. This procs of Killing Machine and has a very obvious synergy when running Obliteration builds. You will get more Killing Machine procs, which means that this talent gets more value, so you generally synergize those two together and pick them together. Finally, we've got Horn of Winter. This is generally not worth to press, it's obviously worth to press if you pick up this talent, but the fact it's on the GCD devalues this option and makes it so that we kind of never pick it up. Generally, we pick up Runic Attenuation when we're running Breath Synagoga builds, and Murderous Efficiency when we're running Obliteration. There are cases though when we run Murderous Efficiency with Breath Synagoga as well, just because of that extra resource generation. However, if you're running two-hander, you would only pick up Murderous Efficiency with Obliteration, because if you're running Breath Synagoga with two-hander, you simply won't get enough natural Killing Machine procs to make the Murderous Efficiency talent worthwhile. For level 30 row, we got a couple of CC option. Death's Reach. This is kind of a niche talent. In PvE, you kind of only pick it up if you need that extra grip range in a raid encounter, like Council, or if you can leverage the Killing Blow cooldown reset in Mythic Plus. For instance, if it's a Sanguine week, Death's Reach is a very good pickup, because you can get some extra grips and make sure your ads and mobs get out of the Sanguine pools. Asphyxiate, this is great single target CC. It's a kind of like the default pick. You have this on generally. However, not in Mythic Plus, where Blinding Sleet is great CC. It's kind of like a pseudo interrupt. If mobs are casting Eustace, they will stop casting and then stop once they're out of the disorient. However, it also applies a heavy slow after the disorient ends, which makes this an excellent tool to help your tank kite or to just interrupt casts that you would otherwise have to stun the mobs to interrupt. I would say that Blinding Slate is the general, default pick in Mythic Plus, and then you just pick a Fixate otherwise generally. The 35 row is all about AoE, but also brings single target throughput. This is actually a tricky row, and it depends heavily on what kind of weapon you're using. To start off for single target, with a two-handed weapon, always pick up Avalanche. Frozen Poles is bad with a two-handed weapon because the damage triggers on any auto attack. Two-handed weapons attack very slowly, which means that Frozen Poles is generally much worse for two-handed weapons compared to dual wield. When it comes to dual wielding, you either pick up Frozen Poles or Avalanche. They deal similar amount of damage. However, parrying Frozen Poles means you have to keep track of how many runes you have available. It only triggers when you have 2 or less runes, so you kind of need to prioritize spending the runes a bit more. This makes Avalanche a nice option because it's completely passive, right? And if they sim closely, I would always pick up Avalanche because then I don't need to care about an additional mechanic, which kind of just, if I do properly, works as well as a completely passive one. For AoE, as in Mythic Plus, this choice gets trickier. Generally, the choice we either pick Avalanche or Frost Scythe. For two-handed weapon, you always pick up Avalanche, and this is due to the fact that you pretty much always run the Fallen Crusader enchant on the two-handed weapon. This means that we cannot leverage the fact that Frost Scythe will spread Razor-Eyes if you have that enchanted on your main hand. So if you can't leverage that, obviously we shouldn't pick up the talent, so that's why we always go Avalanche. For dual wield, it's trickier. So I would generally recommend picking up Frost Scythe as dual wield in Mythic Plus. And this is because you put on Razor-Eyes on your main hand, and your Frost Scythe will then cleave the Razor-Eyes all targets. You do that 5 times, that's a 15% frost damage increase, which is pretty much a 15% damage increase. It's pretty damn significant. If you only use Frost Scythe to apply this debuff, it's pretty much still worth, because it buffs your Breath of Synagosa damage, it buffs your Rhyme proc damage, it buffs your Remorseless Winter damage, everything gets boosted by it, which makes it very worthwhile. However, it's still fine to pick up Avalanche. You get a bit more priority damage, which is good. So maybe, Tyrannical Week, you could pick up Avalanche. Fortified Week, you could pick up Frost Scythe, something along those lines. The level 40 row, it's all about survivability. Permafrost, very passive. It you don't need to care about it, and just gives you some extra survivability. It's quite nice. Wraithwalk is obviously very nice because we're so slow, so added mobility is always a big plus. And then Death Pact is on demand, big heal. I would say I would default to Wraithwalk just because it's so useful in high movement. When you're running Mythic Plus, it's great in a raid encounter if you have to move across the room, and generally just to keep up with the group, Wraithwalk is like the default pick. But any of these 3 works very well depending on your personal preferences. In the 45 row, we got generally AoE options, but it's all over the place. Gathering Storm, it's an incredibly strong option. It makes your Remorseless Winter hit significantly harder. It also synergizes well with the Everfrost Potency Conduit, and it's generally, the go-to pick for any kind of content for any Frost Death Knight. It's simply way too powerful. We got a Hypothermic Presence. You might think that it synergizes very well with Breath of Synagosa. It reduces the cost of runic power using abilities when you press this button, which synergizes well with Breath of Synagosa, because then you can extend the Breath of Synagosa window, right? However, a longer breath is not always a better breath, and you would give up a ton of damage by not picking up Gathering Storm. So even though there is synergy, there's obvious synergy between Hypothermic Presence and Breath of Synagosa, the synergy is not strong enough to ever pick up this talent. Finally, we have Glacial Advance. This is an interesting talent because it helps us apply Razor-Eyes in AoE. As you remember, I talked about using Frost Scythe to do that as a dual wielder, but never using Frost Scythe with a two-hander because you don't pick up the Razor Eyes enchant. So you might think here, I can pick up Fallen Crusader with a two-hander, and then Glacial Advance to apply Razor Eyes and AoE, and I'm good to go. And that's a good thought. It's a obvious synergy, however, it's not very powerful, unfortunately. Glacial Advance deals good damage in AoE, but you simply give up so much single target by not picking up Gathering Storm. You would use Glacial Advance in single target to apply the Razor Eyes to get that damage boost. It is a DPS increase to do so. However, it's not a significant DPS increase, and if you compare with Gathering Storm, the difference is significant. So, in this row, I would always recommend to pick up Gathering Storm, whatever the situation. Finally, the level 50 row. This is like the build defining row. We've got Ice Cap. This is a bad talent, right? It doesn't work well. The cooldown reduction is not significant. We don't get much from getting all those extra Pillar Frosts. In PvE it was powerful because we had Azerite. We don't have Azerite anymore, so this is pretty much a dead talent, and we just put that on the shelf and kind of forget about it. We then get Obliteration and Breath of Sinagosa, and this is where the interesting part starts. For pure single target, these are very close. If you look at Raid and you look at the top logs, you will see Obliteration guys scattered in between the Breath of Sinagosa guys. And that's because, that's the reality. They are close to single target. However, as soon as we go into Cleave, Breath of Sinagosa is significantly more powerful. It is the Cleave talent. Saying that though, in Raid, what's important is priority damage. So Obliteration is completely fine to run in Raid, and generally, if you're running two-hander, you would always pick up Obliteration, because two-hander and Breath of Sinagosa kind of do not sync well. Actually, that's not technically true. The reality is that two-hander, as a default, is behind dual wield, but picking up Obliteration synergizes so well with two-hander weapons that they almost become equal. Two-hander Obliteration is definitely viable in my view, and you can see top logs using big two-hander weapons that do great damage with Obliteration. It is generally a bit behind, but it is close. For Mythic Plus, I would say that Breath of Sinagosa has the edge because of that cleave damage, but you can definitely run Obliteration and deal good damage and perform well. Alright, so that was all the talent rows and all the recommendations and kind of the little tidbits that are good to know when it comes to the talents. Now let's look at a couple of builds. So first of all, we got the single target Raid Breath of Sinagosa build up here. As I mentioned, Runic Attenuation versus Murderous Efficiency, that's kind of like a tricky option. They seem very close. Furthermore, Frozen Pulse versus Avalanche, they're also generally very close, and it's a personal preference. However, I would recommend picking up Avalanche. Now, if you move on to Obliteration raiding build, it looks similar. We swap up to Obliteration, we kind of always pick up Murderous Efficiency, and then we swap up to Inexorable Assault. And remember, this isn't because Inexorable Assault synergizes with Obliteration, it's because Cold Heart doesn't synergize with Obliteration. Or it has anti-synergy, that's the reason. We always pick up Avalanche here. We have lots of runes when running Obliteration, so there's no point in picking up Frozen Poles. Cool. Two-hander versus dual wield, same thing. You don't change anything because we already pick Avalanche. That's usually the way you change the build. You swap out to Avalanche instead of Frozen Poles. Alright, for Mythic Plus, we got this Breath of Sinagosa build. What we changed is running Frost Scythe. Again, you can run Avalanche and that would be fine, but I would still recommend running Frost Scythe. We pick up Cold Heart, it's great priority damage, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, choose between Runic Attenuation or Murderous Efficiency, depending on preference. When it comes to Obliteration, it's pretty much just the regular raid build. However, you got the choice between Frost Scythe and Avalanche again. Remember, never pick up Frost Scythe with a two-hander, but with a dual wield, you can make this choice to run Frost Scythe in, for instance, a fortified week if you want a bit more AoE. Alright, great. So that was everything I had for you today. I hope you learned something about the talents, maybe something you didn't know about that specific talent that you thought maybe didn't synergize or did synergize. I don't know. If you have any comments or questions, do leave them down below. I'm more than happy to answer anything you might be wondering. Do check me out on Twitch if you fancy. You can always find me on the Acros Discord. I'm more than happy to answer any questions there. Also, do consider subscribing if you want to see more of this kind of content. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more content. Thank you.